Marketing is too distracted. In this episode, Kendall Bishop will discuss with us what marketing goals, roles, and org structure should look like at each stage of building a marketplace. Well, Kendall, you are a great guest to have on this podcast because you have so much experience building growth in awesome marketplaces like Uber, Yelp, SkipTheDishes, and I've, of course, had conversation with you beforehand. And man, you've got a lot of great stuff, great ideas, enough that I know we're not even going to get past the tip of the iceberg in a 20 to 40 minute podcast episode. But I am super happy to have you join us. And, I'd like to throw it to you and just so you can give a few sentences on what are you doing right now?
Yeah, so of course I grew up in marketplaces, like you just mentioned, but now I'm running my own advisory practice working with like seed to Series A stage marketplace and network modeled businesses. Really helping technical and operational founders take what they know they need to achieve and actually put together and execute on a growth plan to get them to their next milestone, usually to raise their next round.
Wow. So exactly what we're talking about. This is going to be awesome. So let's start off by saying, why is this topic something that you're passionate about, something you've decided to pursue with your own company, and something you wanted to talk about today?
Well, of course, I work mainly with marketplace businesses, but the interesting thing is I see almost identical issues when it comes to marketing in, might I even dare say, all startups, regardless of exactly their orientation in the market. So I keep seeing the same problems come up, and I am passionate about scalably like helping founders figure out how to create the environment for marketing to deliver more impact, because usually the challenges actually pertain to the environment we've created for marketing to operate within. So many marketplace marketing teams, like especially at the startup level, feel as though they're doggy paddling to keep their head above water, while at the same time being perceived oftentimes by other parts of the organization to not be delivering much impact. So that obviously doesn't feel great for anyone in that scenario. And I feel like I want to say to the listeners, buckle up, because I think this one's about to hit home for many of those listening. So do you want me to go through some of the points I had right now that kind of articulate what those main challenges are that I tend to see?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Cool. Okay. So the team, there's a few things that tend to come up almost in every single scenario when I'm looking into like a seed to Series A stage business. So one, the marketing team is usually not working against any type of clear objectives. So this means they actually don't even know what good looks like. Usually because at this stage, to no fault of their own, but the founder hasn't even disseminated company level objectives other than grow faster. So the main issue here is there's a general lack of being able to measure the impact of the different things that the marketing team is doing and be able to prioritize accordingly to actually deliver on the business, deliver impact to get the founding and leadership team closer to the business objectives that they actually want to achieve. So when this is the case, it also generally means that the marketing team has no plan that they're working against, because milestones or end goals to which even a light plan would be usually derived against just don't exist. So that's one of the main things that I see come up that I think we can talk about later, but is a really key takeaway for any leaders who want to see more impact from their marketing teams, is like they have to know from an organizational standpoint what good looks like. Adjacent to that point, there's oftentimes also zero budget logic that's been defined for the marketing team to consider. So they're often expected to just ask every time they need some type of capital allocation. So obviously getting alignment on expenditures here makes complete sense, 100% support of that. But explaining the strategic recommendation to a non-marketing leader who hasn't even provided the overall goals and therefore doesn't know marketing's goals, and you can just see this becomes kind of a really challenging feedback loop, especially when the marketing team doesn't understand the logic by which leaders will or will not allocate budget. So what that ends up meaning, and I know you and I talked about it before, but it's like delayed decision making and a ton of spin because we haven't disseminated down what we're trying to achieve and how we're making decisions within the organization on that. And then the two other big ones, One which my early stage marketers out there are going to feel me on, which is teams and leaders within the organization are just blasting the marketing team with tactical requests to which they're expected to react. So I need a monthly newsletter for my audience, or we need to send mailers next week to this stakeholder. Why aren't we ranking higher on insert industry search term here? We should be posting on platform X more. Why haven't you posted yet this week? So to a marketer who's trying to do stuff that works and deliver an increased ROI over time, like the main reason this gives people like me the heebie-jeebies is when this is happening, marketing is not being given a challenge or a problem to solve. Right? They're just being directed to activate against a tactic that in most cases that non-marketing requester has not even validated the potential impact of in the first place. So what this means is the marketing team has to deviate from any type of predefined plan, which normally would be strategically developed to deliver impact against the objectives longer term. And they become a factory for churning out just random deliverables with unproven ROI. So ton of overwhelm there, and then ton of frustration when you're just reacting to requests and not actually being able to progress against a plan. And so the outcome of all these issues is that there's a ton of spin and distraction in the marketing team, and generally a lack of clear direction. So this is what then happens. The marketing team feels stressed and overwhelmed because they're executing on an endless list of tactics whose impact they do not understand and oftentimes don't see. 2, founders and other leaders get frustrated with marketing because they think they're not doing their job or delivering impact. Again, awful scenario for everyone involved. But in all honesty, they're oftentimes not wrong when they're having that experience, because this environment that we've referred to that's been created or not created in this case, marketing tends to be delivering a smidgen of the amount of impact that they could be. So the biggest takeaway here is like remembering that each time you or your marketing team or your marketing person, whatever that part of your org looks like, each time you choose to do something, you actively choose not to do something else. And this is a big one that we always talk about in marketing when we talk about how product and tech has this environment in which capacity and prioritization is very well respected, and therefore we organize against it in terms of roadmaps and prioritization. And we don't quite get that same grace in marketing. So my biggest shout to anyone who is in early stage that is managing marketing resources is that just because you have another request, does not mean that your team magically gets more time in their day to get that done. So
Right.
these are all the things that we're seeing happen all the time in almost every early stage startup. But the good news is that they're easy to kind of put some guide rails around and change the way impact is delivered.
Yeah. I mean, in the end, it comes down to you're distracted when you don't understand the end goal. And I think that a lot of times people who are outside of marketing, especially the executive level leadership, don't understand the impact that in our day and age, especially marketing can make with the right goals. And so, I think that's why marketing ends up being these order takers who are doing just the random tasks that we associate marketing with, without realizing, well, actually, marketing should probably be accountable to larger business goals that the rest of your go-to-market team or revenue team would be accountable for. These are my thoughts on what you're saying. You can disagree if you'd like, and I'd love to hear it. I think that's one big problem is we don't have end goals, like you're saying, and the goals that we do have aren't spoken, and they're not good goals because we don't know what marketing can actually do often. And that leads to a ton of distraction. It leads, like you said, to marketing feeling like, well, we can't succeed. Like, what does success even look like for me? And so I think there's a lot of pain there on pretty much every side, like you said. So I think this is a great topic. And I think the next question that you started getting into, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on more, is just generally, what does good marketing look like? What should they be held accountable to? Like, what are the right goals at each stage? How should these founders, executives be thinking about that? And of course, how also should marketers be thinking about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I think good marketing is going to look different in each organization at each different stage, and which is again why it's important to create a stage appropriate environment for marketing to be successful. First of all, I think one of the reasons I'm able to impact the businesses I work with now is because they understand I know what it's like to be at that stage, to not have $1,000 to spend, but then to have 10,000 and 100,000 and keep it going up and up and up. And as that
Yeah.
budget and that team scales, what good looks like will change. I think there's two components there. One, which we can talk about, is sort of what is marketing's role in the organization. I think that's one component, and then another being how do you actually produce and output good marketing objectives and good execution against those objectives. So I don't know, do you want to start maybe digging into the like marketing's role? That might be a good place for us to start.
Yeah, I think that I would love to hear more about what marketing's role is, broadly speaking. And then one theme I feel like I'm pulling out of here is it's important not just to have the right answers, but to ask the right questions. And so I think it would be helpful to equip founders to say, hey, what is the right question that I should be asking of my marketing team? Like what is the right indicator of their success generally? Understanding that every company, every industry, every stage, every go-to-market team is probably going to have some differences here, but just, generally speaking, what's the overlap and what areas should they possibly be thinking in?
Interesting. Yeah. So I might start talking about that with marketing's role in an organization, depending on what that product or service is, how it's positioned, and its stage. So obviously marketing's role in any org would vary widely depending on who the target customer is and what the product, service, or solution is that we're offering. So, in a big B2B SaaS company, you might be sales led and marketing supported. Whereas in a high volume, low ticket price B2C marketplace, you generally find yourself marketing led as opposed to sales led. So an interesting example just to depict, maybe to help depict how this might play out, would be, most of us would be familiar with how a food delivery app or marketplace might work. So we could look and say, obviously the food delivery industry is where I grew up, so that's an easy default for me. But on the restaurant and partner acquisition side, the business is completely sales led. So think big inside and outside sales teams. They're building trust and relationships with big partners and independent partners. They're using big processes and contracts and sales forces, and CRM, et cetera, et cetera. So in this scenario, marketing support tactics here could be things like delivering visual sales materials, landing page and owned content development, presence on B2B oriented channels, think LinkedIn, etc. And how you would measure the success of marketing, or what good would look like there, would actually probably be, quality lead generation, pace of lead conversion, MQLs, etc. Whereas in that very same organization, and in our case, marketplace, just to stay on theme, on the customer demand side, you would find yourself marketing led 100%. So then those would be tactics and initiatives like acquisition through paid digital channels, obviously at scale, customer LTV driving initiatives through introducing new restaurants and partners and occasions, frequency increasing programs like subscription programs and rewards, and managing customer churn, retention, etc. So in that case, we're going to be looking at monthly active users, frequency per user, average basket size per user. And so even there, at the end of both of those examples, like the terms that we pull out would be the things that each of those, let's say the B2B marketing team in an organization like that, or B2C, even though part of the same marketing organization, would be looking at different key KPIs. What good looks like, I mean, that could go a few different ways. But another interesting thing actually I want to bring up, especially in marketplace businesses, is how marketing drives overall brand health metrics. So think brand awareness, brand trust, brand love, brand equity, whatever your main focuses are as an organization, that has to impact all stakeholders within that marketplace network. So sometimes it makes the brand team's mandate a bit more complex and challenging, as it needs to not only sit comfortably with, but oftentimes influence all of those companies' audiences. And then so that would be we have our B2C team, our B2B team, and then we may have the brand team who's being held accountable to the more, let's say, less concrete and measurable, but more the feel metrics that you're trying to drive, especially in a multi-sided business. So all of those, you could say we just talked about 3 different marketing teams. Each of those teams is going to have KPIs. How are we going to decide what those are going to be? I know we were going to talk a little bit about the process later, but generally how we would get to what good looks like in each of those scenarios would be coming down from our leaders saying, this is what the business needs to deliver on timeline of like X plus 6, X plus 12. And then it allows us to bring those down into these like more executional oriented KPIs on that timeline trajectory as well.
I love it. And beneath all of that, you've got different organizational structures, different types of businesses that marketing is functioning a lot differently tactically. But, they would need different KPIs to track how well they're doing it in these different tactics. But in every example that you gave, the things that marketing is doing, they're doing to drive revenue. Right, like in a B2B marketplace where your marketing is serving sales, they're doing so because that's the revenue impact tactic to take, right? And then in a B2C marketplace, possibly where marketing is driving revenue, marketing-led growth. It's more clear and it's closer to revenue there where you can measure it for marketing, but they're again impacting revenue. They're going after revenue, and I that's where I think marketing has a lot of ability to impact the bottom line of the company through brand, through demand, through all of the activities that you mentioned. But when we don't think that high level and marketing becomes, we're not actually accountable to those bigger business objectives. We're gonna just take on these random tasks that for some reason marketing is supposed to do. Then marketing doesn't end up driving impact, and that's where you have, I think, a lot of dysfunction in the marketing team, and especially the marketing's relationship with your sales team, marketing's relationship with your executive team, all of those kinds of things. And so, yeah, I think this is a great conversation for that. And I wonder practically if the question that comes to the mind of an executive listening to this is, how can I practically create the right environment for marketing to be successful and for them to drive impact in our business? And I also think it's important to mention, and again, you correct me if you disagree on this, but while I think marketing should drive revenue, and that's very, very high level, everything that marketing is doing should have a bottom line impact on the company. There could be, especially in marketplaces, different what's the word I'm looking for? Emphases, different focuses in marketing, depending on the needs of the organization, like you're saying. So, like you mentioned, average order value, that might be the next big thing to emphasize for marketing to work on. It could be top of funnel acquisition. It could be middle of funnel activation. You know what I mean? It could be a number of these other things that you're accountable to, and so you've got really like top of the not top of the funnel, really high level. You're driving bottom line impact. Mid-level, you have different focuses at different times depending on the needs of the organization. And then bottom level, tactically, you have different KPIs, understanding like why are the actions that I'm taking impactful to those things that are at the very top or middle. So anyway, it kind of went off on a tangent there based on what you're saying, and a lot of that is just from awesome things that I've picked up from you. And so I think the best next question would be, from a founder, how can I practically build this environment?
Okay, so I'm gonna repeat this one thing the whole time, and so hopefully nobody gets sick of it. But we must start with the business objectives. So for me, that's three components. What are we trying to achieve? On what timeline? And for what purpose? And I think it's critical that, really, you normally have 3 to 5 business objectives, so it's very doable. But it's critical that every key player in your organization understands these 3 things, and the why is just as important as the what and the when. And I think a lot of leaders miss out on that because they feel it could actually be distracting to their to teams to give them more information. So we start with the business objectives. And when I hear increased sales as an objective, like that is not good enough, right? So, and I'll challenge founders. They'll say, "Well, we just need to grow. We want to increase sales." So I'll say, "Okay, well, I guess then if we were going to get 1 additional sale over the course of this year, you'd be on target then." And they'll be like aghast, they'll respond to something like, "Well, obviously not." And I'll be like, "Okay, well, then is it 1 additional sale an hour? Is it 1 a day? Is it 1,000 sales a year? Like, give it to me. What is it?" So then what do we need to achieve? Like 1% growth and 1,000% growth are actually still growth. So, and the team's going to make very different decisions depending on where you land. Obviously, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but on that continuum. So, give your team realistic goals and objectives. Give a bit of a stretch if you want. I know a lot of founders feel like we don't want to get people too comfortable with really accessible goals, and the things that change the world tend to have a little bit of crazy energy behind them. So sure, throw a stretch on there. But the key word here is like realistic, like outline of milestones and objectives on a timeline. The timeline is also very, very key. So I'd probably want to dig into this one for a second. Like, one mistake I see lots of founders making is that when they do start set, and again, these are founders who have like big ambitions and big goals, and those are the products that get me out of bed in the morning. So, but we tend to see them setting goals that are, when they do start setting them, they're so wild. They don't add, but they never actually expect them to be met, but they feel as though this will motivate the team to work harder and longer and wilder to try and make this happen. But do not do this. I've lived in a world several times with widely unattainable goals, and it does two detrimental things. And if not right out of the gate, inevitably within several quarters. So one, it causes your marketing team to be super short-sighted and make low ROI decisions, because essentially they feel forced to like buy performance to get close to short-term like desired numbers, which is again not good for anyone, but putting your team under that type of pressure will cause them to do those things. And two, it is so demoralizing for a group of people that want to win, which is usually the type that we recruit into early stage, especially disruptive startups. So super demoralizing for these people to consistently miss targets and never be able to actually say like, fuck yeah, like we crushed it, like we achieved the goal, what's next, give it to us. And they're always like, even just a little bit, like we're always behind, we're always trying to get there. And that essentially will just break the spirit of who tend to be sometimes our most like hungry and valuable team members. So yes. Anyway, back to what we should be doing. Put together 3 to 5 company level objectives. So these should all be super independent and in no way clearly ladder up to one another. So an example could be, we want to reach 2 million ARR, we want to launch product line X, and we want to raise a Series A of X million dollars. So while, of course, these 3 things somehow end up being connected and leading into one another, they're fairly individual in nature. So that's at the company level what we would want to see. What I would not want to see at a company level objective would be 2 million ARR, or let's say annual revenue instead of ARR, 40,000 monthly active users, and an average order value of $50. So the latter 2 here work directly together to make a revenue number. So when you have tight quantitative objectives against inputs that work together to create one of the other objectives, i.e. active users and basket size, of course, frequency would be a component here. It makes it really challenging for the team to be able to prioritize. So the team will then have trouble making a decision onto whether they need to make a quick decision in a moment, and do they optimize for users or AOV, which it ultimately doesn't matter as long as the revenue target's achieved. So you could also flip this, and your commercial metric could be active users, in which case then you'd have to be willing to flex on your revenue numbers. So just really making sure at the company level it's super clear, and none of the company objectives could potentially be competing with one another under the same scenario. And then the marketing team would pull out 3 to 5 of their own objectives from the company level ones. So let's say we use the first scenario where we said we're going to reach $2 million of annual revenue, we're going to launch a product line, and we're going to raise this money. Marketing would look and say, you know what, the founders are really dealing with the fundraising. Marketing probably doesn't have a ton of input there. We're going to have to support the product line of X. Maybe we're going to have to validate it and align on some positioning and pricing in the market. And then we're also going to be directly contributing to the recurring revenue. So what are the 3 to 5 big things we're going to contribute from our team that are going to move those 2 elements forward? Then once we outline 3 to 5 elements there in marketing, I'm really, really big on getting alignment from the leaders every step along the way, just so we don't burn time. As we discussed, we don't want to start up like, never mind a week, like a day is a lot to sacrifice to work against something to which we don't have alignment. So we get alignment on the marketing objectives. We'd outline 3 to 5 things against each one of those that we're going to do to move that particular one forward. We're going to get alignment again from our leaders. And then we're going to build out a tactical plan that's going to also outline our resources that we need to actually get each one of those big bets done. So you almost picture it like a ladder, right? Like we have our company objectives, then we have our marketing objectives, then we have our big bets against each objective, then we have our tactical plan against each of those big bets. And when we kind of phase it out like that, it just feels much more doable and creates visibility as to like, what is marketing actually going to do in this time period, we'll say year, quarter, whatever it is, to move the company goals forward, which then also tends to get us a lot more of empathy and support from other teams in the organization that see what we're trying to achieve on our own accord, never mind, sort of responding to some of the more reactive requests that we discussed earlier.
Man, this is so good. Thank you so much for sharing this. I think just a few more questions, and then we'll wrap up. But one more question I have for you is, what does, at the very early stage, what does a good marketing team look like? I'm talking like hires. If I'm an executive, we're at a startup level, probably seed level or Series A-ish. What would a good marketing team look like? Who should my first marketing hires be?
Yeah, so I'm going to give another vague opener here. Sorry, guys. It's going to depend on many, many, many things. What we're trying to achieve, how much tech is required versus how much like marketing legwork's required, and on and on. But at the early, I'd say the principle I would really want everyone to take away and clearly understand that is, at the early stages of your organization, you need marketing talent that is strong enough to make sound strategic decisions, but also able and willing to implement and execute. So that if you can take one thing away from this discussion, that would be one that I would highlight. Like I see way, way too many startups hiring a director, VP, God forbid, a CMO, like because they think they need the big dog, right? But then the ability to impact out of the gate is low because people who are in that high level of leadership, it's usually been quite a while since they've been executing, since they've built a landing page, implemented Facebook campaigns, gone in and validated the Google Analytics setup. So whatever those things are, usually we don't see high level strategic leadership paired with the ability to implement at the level required. So another big principal watch out I like to share is leveling. So when you're hiring your first marketers, you must make sure there's adequate room both above and below the level that they come in at for you to be able to expand your team as the company evolves. So what you need in year one is going to be materially different than what you need 18 months later, especially for a truly scaling business if you're really like ramping from seed to Series A, et cetera. So do yourself a favor and plan for flexibility right out of the gate. So we talked about, don't bring in super, super high level people who have been, let's say, high level and senior before they come in. But what I've also seen done, which is challenging, is people say, well, I just want someone to feel like part of the leadership team. So maybe historically they were a marketing manager somewhere, but they're our CMO. So they're going to come in at the C level and we're going to have this team. And so even then, and maybe they're able and willing to execute actually, but you're branding them as CMO, let's say, or a VP. What that does that's complicated is that when your business, let's hope, is 10x the size 18 months from now, you actually will need a different level of leadership because your team will have scaled and your needs will be much different. So when you also just start over leveling people, you lose that flexibility and ability to easily bring in someone that makes sense that's a level higher because those levels are actually currently still available in your org. So those are a couple of principles I would say everybody should apply. There's especially when you're in the seed approaching Series A, but practically I would say the manager level would be the highest level of talent that you should look for to get your marketing team off the ground. Potentially even more of like a senior marketing specialist level could do it if you have maybe lower lift marketing requirements. And that's kind of the anchor for your team who's able to take what you're trying to achieve as a business, generally make some good strategic kind of bets around it, but also know either how to personally execute against those or how to acquire the right alternative resources to execute against those as well. So next, I'm a huge fan about specialized contractors. So this is where I'd say do not shy away from alternative and creative resourcing solutions. I've heard so many startups just believe if someone is not employed here, they don't care as much as we do, and therefore the quality and the impact of the work will not be good enough. I personally don't agree with that. I mean, there's a million contractors out there, so just like an employee, you have to vet and select very carefully. But a great example here would be like SEO, so which I personally refer to as the wrinkle cream of marketing. The earlier you get started, the better. It takes time to get your payback. But you would surely get better SEO expertise from a good contractor who focuses on auditing, recommending, and implementing SEO changes as a full-time job versus a general performance marketing manager who's going to be managing, your 8 performance channels right out of the gate. So TLDR here is explore alternative and creative ways to resource, and don't be shy to pull resourcing in ways that doesn't necessarily mean it's full-time employment.
Yeah, I love that. We are big supporters of what you just shared on this podcast, especially because there are so many marketplaces where you can go to get professional level help in so many places. And I think that that's important in the marketplace community to be supportive just of this model. And I think that you also see that when you hire someone, one, you're making a commitment to long-term spending, and 2, you're making a commitment to whatever, if it's especially it's a lower specialist level, to whatever tactic you're hiring them for. So if you're hiring an SEO specialist, you're making a long-term commitment to SEO. Whereas I think if you stay short-term, you're not making that long-term decision to spend money on that. But you're also given a better ability to experiment, to test, to see what works well for your business, what resonates immediately with your market, and to go in a number of different directions. And so, yeah, big fan of outsourcing, and I think that's great. Also, Kendall, one thing I really appreciate about the approach that you've taken is that you do not believe there is a one-size-fits-all plan, and I do not like the culture that there is, especially in the marketing world, of here's the playbook, follow the playbook. This is the playbook. Everyone follow this. Everyone do this. It just doesn't work right. That like every market is different. Every business is different. And there are some overarching themes and which you've addressed really well. And especially some high level, this is how you should be thinking about this. This is how to come to the right answers. This might be the right questions. But to say, not every playbook works. And so I really appreciate that you have approached the questions that way. I think that's really helpful. And so we're going to come to a close here. But I have 2 more questions for you. One, we've started asking all of our guests, outside of this topic, outside of everything we've talked about today, if you had to give quickly one piece of advice to marketplace founders, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, I have one, and I hope it's not a surprise because I feel like it's the crux of marketplaces. But just, unlike non-marketplace businesses, more is not always better. So that the nuance to scaling all sides of your marketplace in tandem so that no stakeholders are left disappointed and expectations continue to be met as you do this little seesaw, like growing all the sides together. I think it's both an art and a science. But I can't stress enough how important it is also to have a forecast that accounts for for the growth of all sides of your marketplace, as well as the understandings of the implications if any of those sides of projections are missed. So know that more, and have your team understand that too, that like growing customer demand to the moon isn't actually good if our supply side isn't scaling at the same time and the same velocity. And one of the best things in my early days at SkipTheDishes that I took away was there was no room for any of the leaders to not have a very, very clear understanding of the implications to the leaders of the other stakeholder groups if you didn't deliver precisely on your side of the forecast. So really making sure all the leaders have it, understand the implications, and that people don't have just a general more is better, faster is better approach, because we've actually seen the marketplaces crumble by not having a patient and very focused approach to scaling. So
yeah, it's important in a marketplace to keep that precise balance between supply and demand. And when you don't, and you hurt your liquidity in your marketplace, I think that's just a horrible experience for your users. That
it can cost you lots of money. Like, it's expensive if you're spending money to build one side, and you lose,
and then it hurts your growth.
Its impact because someone else hasn't been very precise about how they're scaling their side. It's just it's detrimental and it's expensive.
So I'm expecting that listeners to this episode will have to go back and start at the beginning and listen through a second time to catch all of the little bits of gold that you've left here. So that they don't have to do that possibly, or maybe they still will have to. What's the one big thing that you want them to take away from this episode?
The one big thing I would want, especially founders and leaders who have a larger organizational impact in these earlier stage startups and specifically marketplace businesses, is that your marketing team needs your support in terms of objectives, prioritization, and capacity management. So leaving your marketing resources on an island and expecting them to be successful really never results in such. So ensuring that your marketing team always understands the why and the what and the timeline, as well as putting in some light processes to help them be able to prioritize accordingly, take requests that make sense, push back on those that don't, again, because they have those business objectives to measure every single request and every single potential decision against. So don't leave them on an island. Tell them what you need to achieve. Tell them how long they have to achieve it, and really, really, really make sure they understand why, and support them in creating empathy for their limited capacity throughout the rest of the organization.
That's awesome. Well, we're going to leave some links in the show notes for people to connect with you, Kendall, on LinkedIn, which I think this is how I got connected with you, is seeing the amazing stuff that you are putting out on LinkedIn. So, of course, highly recommend that people would connect with you there, and to link up with your business so they could figure out how to get in touch with you and how you might be of service to these marketplace leaders and helping their marketing to drive growth and drive actual business impact. So great episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Listeners, go subscribe to our newsletter. You'll find our content is distributed there in ways that's really helpful for you, and we're taking the most impactful things that we've learned and putting it in that newsletter. And go follow us on Twitter. We just joined Twitter, and we've seen so much of the marketplace community doing awesome stuff there. We'd love to connect with you there. And thanks for listening to this episode. Kendall, thanks for joining, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Thanks for having me.